Hello chess friends and welcome to Azarov's chess channel and welcome to our Garry Kasparov series. So in this series we're following Garry's life and his chess career, and we're back now in the 1984-1985 World Chess Championship between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. So far from the super final we have covered 6 games, 5 winning games by Karpov, only 1 winning game by Kasparov. The other games ended in a draw. So still Anatoly Karpov needed only one more win to become again the World Chess Champion, and they played on the so-called Fischer rule. I've explained it, but I'll explain it again. The Fischer rule said that the winner of the World Chess Championship is the player who gets first 6 wins. So that's why still one more win for Karpov and it would be over for Garry Kasparov. So let's check out now the game 47. So you see this was this was the longest World Chess Championship ever in history. So in the game 47, Kasparov played here with the black pieces, Karpov played here with white pieces, and we have covered the last game that we have covered was the game 32, in which finally Kasparov managed to get 1 win. So the other games between the game 32 and 47 ended in a draw. This was again a cool game, I think, with great strategical and tactical elements. Be prepared, this is really World Championship material. So Karpov opened with the move knight to f3. Kasparov played knight to f6. We have c4 so far. The English opening e6, preparing sort of a Queen's Indian setup, because we're waiting now the move d4. We don't want to play, of course, immediately d5 by ourselves. After something like c takes d5, knight to d5, then we could get some kind of a tempo against the knight. So far here Kasparov delays the situation with the move e6, and here Karpov goes d4 anyway, and Kasparov goes with the move d5. So far we have a similar idea like in the Queen's Gambit decline. In the game knight to c3, we have the 3 knights variation, and now Kasparov goes into the semi-Slav defense, because the Slav defense is one of the most firm and compact defenses that you can play as black against d4, I think. But still you have some positional problems. Of course, it's the bad bishop situation of this bishop on c8. This bishop is perfectly fine, but still it's at least a firm structure in the beginning, because Kasparov lost many games in the so-called Tarrasch defense that he played in the beginning of their super match. He played the move c5, then risked this isolated pawn situation. I've explained it in that games that we have covered so far. So this isolated situation can be really risky, especially against such a great positional player like Anatoly Karpov. So I think, as I said, Kasparov had to change something, and I think this approach to play first a firm and compact setup against also great positional player, of course, like Karpov, is a good strategy. And then maybe if the position opens, if we create maybe some dynamics, then of course it becomes a really complicated game for both sides. At least I think when we play this on this isolated pawn situations like in the Tarrasch defense that Kasparov really played many times, then it's basically black that has, I think, to solve many positional problems, and white could have maybe a comfortable game. So that's why, in my opinion, this was a good choice to go at least into a better opening line. So here bishop to g5, Karpov goes really into the most aggressive line, pinning the knight, and here Kasparov of course protect the knight with the knight from b to d7. The idea about this move is not that we only protecting this, we want to play also much freely with our queen. Then we don't risk after something like bishop to f6 to get maybe here a double pawn structure on the f-file and similar positional disadvantages. So here e3 played by Karpov. We have now this idea queen to a5. The problem sometimes for white can be this knight that is not protected so far. It's only protected by the pawn on b2. There are also some ideas to pin further the knight with the move knight to e4 and bishop to b4. In the game c takes d5, one of the best ways when we have the tension, which was, I think, a good choice so far by Karpov, is to undermine the pressure, because in some occasions black could also create further dynamics with the move c5, and then the game becomes really complicated. First, for instance, we play bishop to b4 and then c5. Even without castling, it's a possible idea here for black to really break the position and further attack this weak knight on c3. So very aggressive approach here already by Kasparov. We have c takes d5. As I said, Karpov slows down the pace, really undermines the pressure in the center. Very important move. And now comes knight to d5. You see, Kasparov plays immediately on this idea to pin further the knight on c3. If you play, for instance, e takes d5, then bishop to d3, and after something like knight to e4, it seems so that, okay, black has maybe created further this attack against knight on c3, but I think even castling is here a position, in this position is a possibility. If you take, for instance, the bishop, knight to g5 comes very active into the game, and I think you could have some troubles here around the square h7, but also around the square f7. For instance, h6 could be maybe met with some tactical shots with knight to f7 and then queen to h5. So that's why it would be very risky to go into this line immediately. Kasparov took with the knight, also with similar ideas to play against this weak knight on c3, and Karpov plays queen to d2. We have knight from the 7th rank to d6, b6, further developing the knight, also aiming here maybe some knight to a4 ideas, further attacking this knight on c3. And Karpov plays now, I think, in inaccuracy in his game, he plays the move knight to d5. Okay, this is a simplification idea. He doesn't want to risk anything, but still maybe bishop to d3 is slightly better, because after something like knight to c3, there is really a cool line, I think, that white can play. White doesn't need to take the knight immediately, can play kingside castling. We are getting out of the range, and still this knight is pinned. If you try, for instance, something like bishop to b4, then we could play something like a3, and after something like knight to e4, we can play queen to b4, queen takes b4, a takes b4. Maybe you can take out this knight, but after knight takes g5, you see, I think white is slightly better here, because we have a better piece activity. All of our pawns are on dark squares. I've mentioned it many times. This relation between bishops and pawns is very important. You see, this bishop is still blocked out. Still, you have to make something happen here and protect your pawn. Maybe you could try knight to d5, but this positional problem can be solved. You see, we can push the pawn further, b5, simply getting rid of our weak pawn here, trading off. Bishop takes b5, knight to h7 is also a threat. We have opened the a file. So here Karpov played, as I said, maybe a slight inaccuracy with the move knight to d5, queen to d2, we have knight to d2, and now e takes d5. We have now simplified the line, which is of course not good when we want to really see some great tactical shots. But again, I'm pointing out that I think at least Kasparov solved the positional problems very early, in a very early stage of the game, and as black, it's perfectly fine. Kasparov doesn't need to go, of course, for a win here. He at least needs a draw, then maybe he can attack again with the white pieces. So that's why I think his idea, as I said in the beginning, to play maybe the Smyslov more firm and compact opening was a good strategy in the continuation of this World Championship match. So after e takes d5, we can notice again that, for instance, black has many pawns on light squares, so that's why we should try it somehow, maybe to get rid of this light square bishop, trade it off for this good light square bishop of whites. As I said, really, I sometimes repeat myself, but I really need to now pay good attention, because the relation between bishops and pawns in this kind of position is very important to recognize. Here in the game bishop to d3, you see how this bishop, this light square bishop of whites, becomes really the best minor piece on the board. Bishop to d3, we have now a5, which is a very cool move by Garry Kasparov. I would call it sort of the pawn majority attack. I'll explain what I mean about that. There are always ideas from white's perspective to play on this minority attack. This would be an attack when we are trying to battle with 2 pawns against 3 pawns. The idea about the minority attack in chess is to provoke some kind of a weakness. Maybe we can open some files. We can maybe cause some isolated pawns or backward pawns here in black's position. If you could just imagine, if we trade off maybe these 2 pawns against these 2 pawns, then maybe black is continuing here with the backward pawn on c6, and it could be a clear target of white here in the continuation of the game. So here it's very interesting that black, Garry Kasparov, of course, in this case, plays. Of course, he has here the pawn majority on the queen side. It's 3 versus 2, but he plays basically a minority attack, a 1 versus 2. Here he's trying to battle with this 1 pawn against these 2 pawns. So this is a historical moment. We have seen now a pawn minority attack. Just kidding. As I said, I hope you realize what I'm trying to say. What the idea about this minority attack is also, for instance, we could push the pawn further with a4, then to play maybe a3, and again we have provoked some weaknesses after maybe something like b takes a3, rook to a3, and we have now created here an isolated pawn situation on the a file, and this could be now an object of black's attack. So I hope I don't complicate things too much, but it was, I think, a very cool moment in this game. Very important move to recognize. I'm not sure how many of us would play this move. Maybe we would try to develop our minor pieces for maybe bishop to d6, bishop to e6, or similar ideas. Very nice move. So that's why you see the idea about this minority attack, this 1 versus 2 situation here on the queen side, was to provoke some weaknesses. And now, okay, Karpov managed to block this idea with the move a4, but now there is a clear target. It's the weak b4 pawn. So that's basically the idea of the minority attack. And I've talked about this minority pawn minority and pawn majority attacks on my YouTube chess channel, on my Basics in Chess series. I'll show you, of course, the links of that video, so you can maybe study these common strategies in chess. You can also maybe learn more. So the minority attack is a very simple but also complicated idea. And you see now, after the move a4, we have now a new weakness, and now the bishop comes very active into the game. The problem is now you cannot kick away the bishop with any minor piece. This bishop is perfectly fine in the game. King to e2. It's not about king security anymore. This is perfectly fine. It wasn't maybe a mistake here by Karpov to get the king on e2, because the queens are off the board. So far the king is not endangered. In the game, bishop to g4, and now comes this relation between bishops and pawns, because there are basically no good squares for this light square bishop. What we want to do, at least, we want to give up this light square bishop for this light square bishop, because we have seen this bishop on d3 is Karpov's best minor piece on the board. So that's why bishop to g4, bishop to h5, we're maneuvering the bishop to g6, and we try to trade it off. So here h4, we have castling played by Kasparov, we have g4, and now bishop to g6. Now the bishops have to be traded off, and black is continuing, I think, with a good dark square bishop, also with a good knight, because in some occasions we could maybe occupy also the weak c4 square. So we have b3. Karpov, of course, realizes his threats. There are, of course, some weaknesses in his position. It's the weak c4 square. So that's why here Kasparov finally takes. King takes d3 here by Karpov, and now rook from f to e8. Of course, attacking here also the backward pawn on e3, which is also sort of a weakness in white's position. So rook from a to c1. If you try e4 immediately to improve our backward pawn, to advance the pawn, I don't think it's a good idea, because your king is in the center. Then maybe d takes e4, f takes e4, and now h6, kicking with the bishop, bishop to e3, and now rook from a to d8. I think it's very dangerous. You look at this rooks against the king. The king is also the problem, I think, in this particular mover. The king is also a little bit stuck to the defense of the bishop on e3, so that's why it's not so good. I think there are maybe some tactical shots if the king goes somewhere here, maybe to c2, then also to get the knight very active with knight to d5, then maybe take out the bishop. So really a messed up position if you go into this line. So rook from a to c1 here played by Karpov. He stays now. So far he's trying to get the position at least compact. In the game c5, Kasparov breaks the position immediately. He realizes the king is in the center. Now it's time to break somehow and open the position. And that's what I liked about this new Kasparov in this match game, because he played more actively. He found really better opening choices. As I said in the beginning, he's now playing much more active, much more freely. It's something that probably liberated him. I'm not sure what happened, but he played here really an active game. c5, immediately breaking the position. Bishop to f4, rook to c8, of course, competing on the open file. So far the file is not open, but it will be probably open, so that's why you have to compete on potentially open files. Rook to c8, d takes c5. Kasparov doesn't take immediately, which is very good. Knight to d7 here, c6 played by Karpov. If you try, for instance, something like rook from h to d1, you see now how your king can be very vulnerable to your attacks. Now the knight comes very actively into the game. Knight to c5, you have to get the king here to e2. You don't want to go, of course, on the c file where the rook is. So there are now discovered attacks on the rook. So that's why here king to e2 would be sort of a line that you have to play. And this knight, pay now also good attention. This knight is very aggressive. Also in other lines here, after the move king to e2, I think knight to e6 would be a winning continuation. Even if you try to retreat with the bishop somewhere, then even here d4 is a possibility. Knight to d4, again discovered attacks by the rook on the king. So that's why here bishop to f4. Here, as I said, d takes c5, knight to d7. So that's why Karpov gave back his pawn, but at least he provoked some kind of weakness. Again, we have a backward pawn, but it's not such a weak backward pawn, I think, here, the pawn on c6, because it still can be improved here on c5, and we can connect these two pawns in the center, and they are very, very dangerous. So rook from h to d1, we have knight to c5, we have king to c2, and now f6, restricting this bishop's ability to play somewhere very actively, because I think white could maybe solve somehow the problems if white manages to get the bishop somehow to e5. So far it's not possible, but maybe and remaneuver it here to b2, and staying on this long diagonal could be also maybe a nice defensive strategy. f6, very nice prophylactic idea here by Kasparov. We have knight to f1, and now knight to e6, kicking away the bishop to g3. The bishop is now really out of game, and now Kasparov gets this other rook into the game. Very important move. Rook from e to d8, bishop to f2, and now this is a very clear idea. c5, we have now the space advantage. We have really pushed away all of these minor pieces of white. Look at this knight on f1, this bishop on f2, really not so good. In the game, knight to d2, Karpov is trying to improve his activity of the knight, but now c4, very, very cool move. We have b takes c4, and now Kasparov goes knight to c5. Very, very important move, because the c takes d5 doesn't work. You get a knight to e4, the discovered attack, and you lose the bishop on f2. So that's why here Karpov tried to counterattack with e4, and now a very cool move, d4. So you see how Kasparov created really dynamics. He's now a pawn down, but this is a very, very annoying pawn. You basically don't have good moves here. Knight to b1, maybe rook to a1 was slightly better. Then still d3 could happen. You have to move your king somewhere, and maybe here rook to b8, rook to a2, and now this knight still, I think, will find good ways into the game here. Maybe knight to d4, or maybe knight to f4, and then knight to e2. Still a dangerous position here for white. So knight to b1 was a huge mistake, because now Kasparov has now the move d3, kicking with the king to b2, and now here, after the move d2 in this position, believe me or not, Karpov resigned. You see how great this attack was. Although, as I said, the queen's pawn off the board, it wasn't so complicated in the beginning, but you see how Kasparov created dynamics. This are the position that he's searching for. Let's see now possible continuation. First of all, you have to play rook to c2 to not lose your rook, but now you get a nice tactical shot. Of course, knight to d3, the fork on the king and the bishop, and it will be game over. So again, Karpov realized the tactical threats and resigned the game. So incredible game. Great attack by Garry Kasparov. The result is now 5 wins for Karpov, 2 wins for Garry Kasparov. Garry is back in the game. The Dark Knight rises, and it was, as I said, really incredible super final between maybe really one of the two of best in chess history. Incredible stuff what happened. Look at the strength that Kasparov got after his first win. He's playing now much more actively. This is the Garry that we know, and you be prepared. We'll have really some wild games in the continuation of this super match. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Incredible stuff. If you want to see more Garry Kasparov's games from the series, check out my Garry Kasparov saga. Here's the link, his career from the beginnings. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link, and here are also the links of this pawn majority and pawn minority attacks as the common strategies that you can use in your chess games. I think they're very important, and you can also subscribe to my channel if you like this content. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.